The bedroom door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the framed photographs on the dresser. Sarah's back hit the edge of the mattress, and before she could steady herself, Jake was there, his hands planted on either side of her shoulders, caging her against the bed. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, his jaw set in that familiar line of determination she'd seen 1,000 times before, but never quite like this. Never with this much raw desperation bleeding through his usually controlled exterior. "Look at me," he demanded, his voice rough as gravel. "Eyes open." Sarah's gaze had drifted to the side, to the window where rain pelted against the glass in sheets, mimicking the storm that had been brewing between them for months. She couldn't bear to see what she knew would be written in his eyes. The hurt, the accusation. The terrible, suffocating love that made everything so much worse. "Jake, please," she whispered, but her traitorous eyes obeyed his command anyway, lifting to meet his stare. What she found there wasn't what she expected. Yes, there was pain, deep and cutting, but there was also something fiercer. Something that looked dangerously close to hope. 3 months, he said, each word deliberate. "You've been pulling away from me for 3 months. And I've been watching you disappear right in front of my eyes. I'm done pretending I don't see it. I'm done giving you space. Whatever this is, whatever's eating you alive, we're dealing with it right now." The thing about Jake Sullivan was that he'd always been able to read her better than anyone else in the world. They'd grown up together in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, where everybody knew everybody's business and secrets were currency. She'd been the shy girl with books always tucked under her arm, and he'd been the golden boy who could have had his pick of anyone but had chosen her. She still didn't understand why, even after 8 years of marriage, Sarah's hands came up instinctively to push against his chest. But the moment her palms made contact with the solid warmth of him, she faltered. God, when was the last time she'd really touched him? When had they stopped being two people who couldn't keep their hands off each other, and become these careful strangers who moved through their beautiful Victorian house like ghosts haunting separate rooms? "You don't understand," she managed, hating how weak her voice sounded. "You can't understand, then make me understand." Jake's arms remained rigid, holding his weight, keeping her trapped in this moment she'd been trying to avoid since the day everything changed. "Whatever it is, Sarah, it can't be worse than losing you. And I am losing you. I can feel you slipping away." The rain outside grew louder, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in her ears. Sarah closed her eyes again, unable to maintain the intensity of his gaze, and immediately felt his hand cup her jaw, gentle but insistent. "No, eyes open. Stay with me." A sob caught in her throat. How could she tell him? How could she put into words the thing that had been eating her alive from the inside out? The secret she'd carried alone, letting it build a wall between them brick by brick until they were living in separate worlds, despite sharing the same bed, the same address, the same last name. "I can't have children," she blurted out, the words torn from somewhere deep and wounded inside her. "The doctor confirmed it 6 months ago. All those years we said we were waiting for the right time, and now there is no right time because there's no possibility. My body doesn't work right. It never will." The silence that followed felt like falling. Jake's expression shifted through a dozen emotions in the span of a heartbeat, each one cutting her deeper than the last. This was it. This was the moment everything would finally shatter completely. He'd married her thinking they'd have the future they'd always talked about. The one with kids running through this old house, with little league games and school plays and all the normal, beautiful chaos that was supposed to fill their lives, but then something unexpected happened. Jake's arms gave out, or maybe he let them, and suddenly his full weight was pressing her down into the mattress as he buried his face against her neck. His shoulders shook, and Sarah realized with a start that he was crying. Jake Sullivan, who'd been the rock through his father's death, through her mother's cancer scare, through every crisis and hardship life had thrown at them, was falling apart in her arms? "You've been carrying this alone," he said against her skin, his voice muffled and broken. "For 6 months. You've been dying inside, and you didn't tell me. Sarah's own tears started then, hot and fast, years of holding everything together finally giving way. Her arms wrapped around his broad back, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted sideways. They stayed like that for minutes that stretched into forever. Two people remembering how to be broken together instead of alone when Jake finally lifted his head. His eyes were red but blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Do you really think I care about that more than I care about you? Do you honestly believe that changes anything about how much I love you?" "You wanted children," Sarah said, the words barely audible. "We both did. We planned our whole future around it." "I wanted a future with you," Jake corrected, his thumb brushing away her tears with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Everything else was just details." "We'll figure it out, Sarah. There are other options. Other ways to build a family if that's what we want. But right now, all I care about is getting my wife back. Getting us back." Sarah wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But the fear that had taken root in her chest months ago still whispered its poison, telling her that this was just the first crack, that eventually the loss of the future they'd imagined would breed resentment. That love alone wasn't enough to bridge this particular gap. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, and watched something flicker across his face. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. Determination. "Then I guess I'll have to prove it to you," Jake said softly. And Sarah had the distinct feeling that her careful isolation was about to be thoroughly dismantled. Whether she was ready for it or not, the morning after their confrontation, Sarah woke to an empty bed and the smell of coffee wafting up from the kitchen. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of Jake moving around downstairs. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the world outside clean and bright, as if the storm had washed away. More than just the dirt on the windows, she felt raw, exposed. The secret she'd guarded so carefully was out now, and there was no taking it back. Part of her wanted to pull the covers over her head and hide from whatever came next, but she could already hear Jake's footsteps on the stairs, could picture the determined set of his shoulders. He'd meant what he said last night. He wasn't going to let her retreat anymore. When he appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with breakfast, Sarah actually laughed, the sound rusty and surprised. "What are you doing?" "Taking the day off," Jake announced, setting the tray on the bedside table with the careful concentration of someone who didn't cook often but was giving it his best effort. "Called Principal Morrison first thing. Told her I had a family emergency." "Which I do, by the way. My family is in emergency mode and I'm staging an intervention." Sarah pushed herself up against the headboard, tucking the sheet around her waist. Jake taught history at Millbrook High School, and he never took sick days. Never. His perfect attendance record was something of a running joke among the faculty. "Jake? You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He sat down on the edge of the bed, handing her a mug of coffee that was exactly the right shade of light brown, just how she liked it. He still remembered, even though they'd barely shared morning coffee in months. "We're going to talk." "Really talk? About everything you've been holding in, everything you've been afraid to tell me?" Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for something to hold on to. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with when you found out." Jake's voice was gentle but firm, leaving no room for evasion. "Walk me through all of it. I need to understand where your head's been." So she did. Haltingly at first, then with increasing momentum as the dam finally broke completely, Sarah told him everything. About the appointment 6 months ago when Dr. Chun had delivered the news with professional sympathy. About the medical terms she'd researched late at night while Jake slept beside her, each one confirming what she already knew. About the way she'd felt her identity shifting, questioning what it meant to be a woman who couldn't do the one thing women's bodies were supposedly designed to do. "I kept thinking about your mom," Sarah admitted, staring down into her coffee. "How she used to talk about the day you were born, how becoming a mother was the best thing that ever happened to her. And your sister with her 3 kids, how she just glows when she talks about them." I felt like I was failing at something fundamental. Jake's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. My mom also used to say that marrying my dad was the best thing that ever happened to her. She had a whole life beyond being a mother, Sarah, and Emily loves her kids. But I've also heard her cry to Mom about how hard it is, how she sometimes misses her career, how she feels like she lost herself for a while. He squeezed her hand. There's no one right way to be a woman. There's no one right way to have a meaningful life. But you wanted children, Sarah repeated, needing him to acknowledge it, to admit that something real had been lost. I know you did. You're incredible with your students, the way you mentor them, the way you show up for the kids who need extra support. You would have been an amazing father. Would have been? Jake's eyebrows shot up. Sarah, there are about a dozen different ways we could still become parents if we want to. Adoption, fostering, surrogacy. And honestly, we're 32 years old. We've got time to figure out what we actually want versus what we always assumed we wanted. Sarah set down her coffee mug with trembling hands. What if I can't do it? What if the idea of adoption or fostering just makes me feel worse, like I'm settling for second best? What if I'm too broken to even try? Then we don't. Jake shifted closer, taking both her hands in his. But you're not broken, and I need you to hear that. A medical condition doesn't define your worth. It doesn't make you less of anything. You are the same brilliant, complicated, beautiful woman I fell in love with when we were 16 years old. The tears came again, but different this time, softer, less about grief and more about release. I've been so scared, Sarah whispered. Scared that you'd look at me differently. Scared that I'd become this burden you felt obligated to carry. Scared that eventually you'd resent me for all the things we couldn't have. Jake pulled her forward until her forehead rested against his, their breath mingling in the small space between them. I'm scared too, but not of any of that. I'm scared of losing you to this darkness you've been living in. I'm scared that my wife has been suffering alone because she didn't trust me enough to share it. It wasn't about trust, Sarah protested. I just didn't want to make it your problem too. Sarah. Jake's voice carried a note of gentle exasperation. I'm your husband. Your problems are my problems. That's literally the deal we signed up for. For better or worse in sickness and health. Did you think those were just pretty words? She let out a shaky laugh. When you put it that way, I sound like an idiot. Not an idiot. Just human. And hurt. And trying to protect both of us in the only way you knew how. Jake pulled back enough to look at her properly. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop protecting each other from hard things. We're going to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. And we're going to figure out what our future looks like together, not based on some script we wrote when we were kids who didn't know anything about real life. Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hidden reservation, but all she saw was sincerity. Raw, unflinching sincerity. You really mean all this, don't you? Every word. Jake stood up and held out his hand. Now come on. Get dressed? We're going out. Out where? Does it matter? We've been living like roommates who occasionally share a bed. I want to take my wife on a date. I want to remember what it feels like to just be us without all the weight of expectations and fears. Just for today, can we try that? Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, at the familiar calluses and the simple gold band on his ring finger. It would be so easy to refuse, to say she wasn't ready, to retreat back into the safe numbness she'd been cultivating. But something in her chest, something that had been dormant for months, flickered weakly to life. Okay, she said, and placed her hand in his. Just for today. They ended up at the diner on Main Street where they'd had their first official date 17 years ago. The red vinyl booths were the same, slightly cracked and patched with duct tape in places. The jukebox still played oldies from the 50s and 60s. Even Dolores, the owner who'd been serving comfort food to Millbrook residents for as long as anyone could remember, was still manning the counter, her gray hair piled high and her smile warm as summer. Well, Dolores called out when they walked through the door, the little bell jangling overhead. Haven't seen you two in here together for ages. Thought maybe you'd gotten too fancy for us since you fixed up that big house on Elm Street." Jake grinned, sliding into their old booth by the window. "Never too fancy for your apple pie, Dolores." "Damn right," the older woman said with satisfaction. "I'll bring you to the usual. Don't even try to tell me your tastes have changed." As Dolores bustled away, Sarah realized with a start that she couldn't remember the last time they'd done something this simple. When had they stopped having regular date nights? When had their relationship become something that existed only in the spaces between work and sleep and the endless cycle of household tasks? "I forgot how much I loved this place," Sarah said, running her hand over the table's formica surface. "Remember how we used to come here after every football game our senior year? You'd always order the strawberry milkshake, even though you were lactose intolerant and would spend the ride home complaining about your stomach." Jake's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I kept telling you to get something else, and you kept insisting it was worth it." "It was worth it," Sarah insisted, feeling something loosen in her chest. "Those milkshakes were incredible. They fell into an easier rhythm then, trading memories like trading cards, each one more valuable than the last. The time Jake had tried to teach her to drive stick shift and she'd stalled his truck 6 times in a row. The summer they'd worked together at the community pool and spent their lunch breaks planning their future. The night he'd proposed under the old oak tree in the park. Nervous and earnest and so young it made her heart hurt to remember. Somewhere between the burgers Dolores brought them and the pie they shared with 2 forks, Sarah felt something shift. The heaviness that had been sitting on her chest for months didn't disappear, but it became more manageable, like a weight she could actually carry instead of one that was crushing her. "I want to tell you about the doctor's appointment," Sarah said suddenly, setting down her fork. "The actual appointment, not just the outcome." Jake nodded, giving her his full attention the way he always had when something mattered. It was one of the things she'd fallen in love with about him, his ability to make whoever he was talking to feel like the most important person in the world. Sarah took a breath and began. She described the cold examination table, the way Dr. Chun had explained the results with careful professionalism, while Sarah's entire world tilted on its axis. She talked about sitting in her car in the parking lot afterward, unable to drive, unable to think beyond the crushing weight of loss for something she'd never actually had. "I kept thinking about all the times we'd said someday," Sarah continued, her voice thick. "Someday when we're more financially stable. Someday when the house is renovated. Someday when my career is more established." And then suddenly there was no someday, and I realized we'd been postponing the one thing that didn't care about our timeline. Jake reached across the table, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I have regrets about that too. About waiting. But Sarah, we were being responsible. We were trying to do things right. We couldn't have known. That's what makes it worse somehow." Sarah blinked back tears, aware of Dolores and the handful of other customers, but beyond caring. The not knowing. "The fact that we made all these careful plans and none of it mattered because my body had different ideas." "Your body didn't betray you," Jake said firmly. "Your body is just your body. It has limitations, like everybody's body does. That doesn't make it wrong or broken or any of the other things I know you've been thinking." Sarah wanted to argue, but the conviction in his voice stopped her. "How are you so okay with this? How are you not angry or disappointed or resentful?" Jake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I'm sad. I won't lie about that. I'm sad about losing the future we'd imagined. But Sarah, you know what I'm more sad about? The fact that you've been destroying yourself over this for months. The fact that you pulled away from me instead of letting me in. The fact that we lost 6 months we could have been facing this together." The truth of his words landed like a physical blow. Sarah had been so focused on protecting him from disappointment that she'd never considered she might be causing a different kind of pain. The pain of exclusion, of watching someone you love suffer and not being allowed to help. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "I know you did." Jake squeezed her hand. "But we're partners, Sarah. That means we carry the hard stuff together." It means you don't get to make unilateral decisions about protecting me from life. I'm a grown man. I can handle difficult news. What I can't handle is being shut out." Dolores appeared then with a fresh pot of coffee, topping off their mugs with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this for decades. She didn't comment on Sarah's obvious tears or the intensity of their conversation, just patted Sarah's shoulder in passing with wordless understanding after she left. Jake leaned back in the booth, studying Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. Don't just tell me what you think I want to hear." Sarah straightened, bracing herself. "Okay. Setting aside all the assumptions and expectations we've been carrying around, all the stuff about what we're supposed to want or what makes a complete life, do you actually want to be a mother? Not because it's what we always said we'd do, not because society says you should, but because it's something that would genuinely fulfill you and make your life richer." The question hung between them, and Sarah realized with a start that no one had ever asked her that before. Not in that way. Not stripped of all the shoulds and supposed tos. She sat with it, really examining her own heart for the first time in months. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I thought I did. I always assumed I wanted children because that's just what people do, what we were always going to do. But when I'm honest with myself, I'm not sure I ever examined whether it was something I wanted from me or something. I wanted because it seemed like the next logical step." Jake nodded slowly. "Okay, that's honest. That's a starting point. What about you?" Sarah turned the question back on him. "Same rules. Deep down, setting aside everything else, do you want to be a father?" He considered it, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I think I do. But I also think the version of fatherhood I imagined was probably pretty naive. I pictured coaching Little League and helping with homework and all the hallmark moments. I never really thought about the hard parts, the sacrifices, the way it would fundamentally change our lives. And honestly, I don't know if I want those things more than I want the freedom to focus on us, on our careers, on traveling and having adventures while we're still young enough to enjoy them." Sarah felt something in her chest expand, like a knot finally coming loose. "So maybe we're both operating on autopilot, following a script we never actually examined?" "Maybe," Jake agreed. "Which means maybe we need to figure out who we actually are and what we actually want, independent of all the expectations we've been carrying around." "That sounds terrifying," Sarah said with a weak laugh. "It does," Jake acknowledged, "but also kind of exciting. We get to reinvent our future. We get to be intentional about it instead of just following the path of least resistance." They stayed in the diner for another hour, talking through possibilities that ranged from practical to wild, travel, career pivots, starting a foundation to help kids in need, fostering teenagers who'd aged out of the system, focusing on being the best aunt and uncle they could be to Emily's kids. Nothing was off the table. Nothing was decided. And somehow that felt like exactly what they needed. The next 2 weeks felt like physical therapy for a marriage. Every day brought new conversations, some easy and some excruciating, as Sarah and Jake worked to rebuild the foundation that had cracked under the weight of unspoken fears. They talked over breakfast before Jake left for school. They texted throughout the day, little check-ins that felt both familiar and new. They spent evenings on the back porch, watching the sun set over their overgrown garden and making plans to finally finish the landscaping they'd been postponing for years. But growth isn't linear and healing isn't neat. Sarah discovered that opening up about one fear meant confronting a dozen others that had been hiding underneath. She'd built such elaborate defenses around her pain that dismantling them felt like learning to walk again without the crutches she'd come to depend on. It came to a head on a Thursday night when Emily called about their nephew's birthday party the following weekend. Sarah was washing dishes while Jake answered, and she couldn't help but overhear his side of the conversation. The easy laughter, the casual mention of bringing a gift, the comfortable way he navigated the world of family gatherings that Sarah had been avoiding for months. When he hung up, she gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. "I can't go." Jake set down his phone carefully. To Ethan's birthday party? I can't sit there and watch Emily being the perfect mother while everyone asks us when we're finally going to have kids of our own. I can't do it, Jake. I'm not strong enough yet. She heard him cross the kitchen, felt him come up behind her, but she couldn't turn around. Couldn't face him when she felt this raw and exposed. Sarah, nobody's going to ask us that, Jake said quietly. I talked to Emily last week. Told her what was going on, asked her to spread the word to the family that the subject was off limits. Sarah spun around, water dripping from her hands. You what? I told them. Jake's expression was calm but unyielding. Not all the medical details, just that we were dealing with some stuff and needed people to stop asking about kids. Emily was amazing about it. She actually apologized for not noticing you'd been struggling. Said she'd been so wrapped up in her own chaos that she hadn't been paying attention. Anger flared hot and sudden in Sarah's chest. You had no right to do that. Those are my private details, my medical information. You can't just go around telling people. I didn't tell them anything specific. Jake interrupted, his voice still level. I told them what we needed from them in order to feel comfortable at family gatherings. That's different. That's setting boundaries, which is something we should have done months ago. You should have asked me first? Sarah knew she was being irrational, that he'd actually done her a kindness, but the feeling of losing control over her own narrative made her want to lash out. You should have checked with me before sharing anything about this situation with anyone. Jake's jaw tightened, the first real sign of frustration she'd seen since their confrontation in the bedroom. You're right. I should have asked you first. But Sarah, you also need to recognize that this situation affects me too. I'm not just some supporting character in your story. I'm your husband. This is my family, and I'm allowed to ask them for support in navigating something difficult. The words hit like cold water. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. He wasn't wrong. She'd been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't fully considered that Jake was going through something too. Different, maybe, but still real. Still valid. I don't know how to do this, Sarah admitted, her anger deflating as quickly as it had risen. I don't know how to let people in without feeling like I'm losing pieces of myself. I don't know how to be vulnerable without feeling weak. I don't know how to stop being angry at my own body for failing me. Jake's expression softened. He closed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms despite her wet hands and rigid posture. Then we figure it out together. And maybe we get some help figuring it out. Professional help. Sarah stiffened. You think I need therapy? I think we need therapy, Jake corrected. Couples counseling, and probably individual therapy for both of us. This isn't something we can just talk our way through. Sarah, we're dealing with grief and identity and communication patterns that go back years. That's what therapists are for. The suggestion should have felt like failure, but instead it felt like relief. An acknowledgement that they didn't have to have all the answers. That it was okay to ask for guidance from someone trained to help people navigate exactly these kinds of storms. Okay, Sarah said into his shoulder. Okay, we'll find someone. They stood like that for several minutes, swaying slightly, until Sarah's breathing evened out and the tension in her muscles began to ease. When she finally pulled back, Jake's shirt was damp with her tears, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Can I ask you something? Sarah ventured. When you talked to Emily, what did you actually tell her? I need to know what our family knows. Jake tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. I said that we'd been going through a rough patch, that there were some medical issues affecting our family planning, and that we needed some space from questions about having kids while we figured things out. That's it. Emily said she'd tell Mom and the others and that everyone would understand. And honestly, I think they were relieved to know there was an actual reason you'd been so distant. Mom's been worried about you. Sarah's throat tightened. Jake's mother, Patricia, had become a second mom to her over the years. The thought of Patricia worrying, of causing that kind of concern without even realizing it, made her feel selfish and small. I should call her, Sarah said. I should explain. Apologize for disappearing. Only if you want to. Jake squeezed her shoulders. But Sarah, you don't owe anyone explanations or apologies for taking care of yourself. You were doing the best you could with what you were feeling. Nobody's mad at you. They're just worried and want to help if they can. The generosity of that, the complete absence of judgment, made Sarah want to cry all over again. How did I get so lucky? She whispered. How did I end up with someone who's this patient and understanding? Jake smiled, but there was an edge to it. I'm not a saint, Sarah. I've been frustrated and hurt and angry about all of this too. But I love you more than I'm frustrated. I'm committed to us more than I'm hurt. And I believe we can get through this more than I'm angry. That's not patience. That's just choosing us over everything else. Sarah rose on her toes and kissed him, slow and deep, trying to pour everything she couldn't say into the connection between them. When they pulled apart, both breathing harder, Jake rested his forehead against hers. About the birthday party, he said quietly. I won't force you to go if you're really not ready. But I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. And I think hiding from life and family isn't actually protecting you. It's just making the world smaller. Sarah considered this, examining her fear in the light of his words. Was she really not ready, or was she just comfortable in her avoidance? Was staying home an act of self-care or self-sabotage? I'll go, she decided. But if it gets too hard, if I need to leave, then we leave, Jake finished. No questions asked. We can stay for 5 minutes or 5 hours. Whatever you need. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, the kind of crisp October day that made everything feel possible. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her sweater for the third time and wondering if she should change into something less clingy, less bright, less noticeable. Old habits died hard. You look beautiful, Jake said from the doorway, already holding the car keys. And we're going to be late if you change again? Sarah made a face at him in the mirror, but had to admit he was right. They'd already rescheduled once this week when Sarah had panicked and claimed a headache. Jake had let it slide without comment, but she could tell he was hoping. She'd follow through today. The drive to Emily's house in the suburbs took 20 minutes. And Sarah spent most of it alternating between normal conversation and silent panic. But then they pulled up to the house decorated with colorful balloons and heard the sounds of children's laughter floating through the open windows. And something in Sarah's chest eased unexpectedly. Emily met them at the door, her hair escaping from a messy bun and what looked like cake frosting on her sleeve. Thank God you're here, she said, pulling Sarah into a fierce hug before Sarah could brace for it. Mom's been trying to organize the games. She keeps arguing with Dad about the rules. And I'm pretty sure if someone doesn't referee, someone's going to end up in the pool with their clothes on. The casual warmth, the complete lack of awkwardness or pity helped Sarah relax another fraction. Emily stepped back, studying Sarah's face with sisterly concern but not dwelling on it. You doing okay? Getting there, Sarah said honestly. Thanks for understanding about everything. Emily waved this off. Please. You think I don't have days where I want to run screaming from all of this? She gestured at the chaos visible through the doorway. Last week, Ethan had a meltdown in the grocery store that lasted 45 minutes. I love my kids desperately, but parenthood is also really freaking hard. And I think we do everyone a disservice by pretending otherwise. Jake laughed and headed inside to find his parents. Leaving the two women alone for a moment, Emily's expression turned more serious. For what it's worth, you and Jake are my relationship goals. You two have always been so solid, so genuinely happy together. Whatever you decide about kids or not kids, I think you're going to be fine because you have that foundation. Sarah blinked back unexpected tears. I haven't felt very solid lately. Nobody does when they're going through something hard, Emily said simply. But you're here. You're trying. That counts for a lot? The party was controlled chaos in the best way. 12 7-year-olds hyped up on sugar and excitement. 3 exhausted parents trying to maintain order, and various relatives who'd shown up to celebrate Ethan's big day. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying it. especially when she got paired with her nephew for the three-legged race and they fell in a laughing heap halfway to the finish line. "Aunt Sarah, you're terrible at this," Ethan declared, grinning at her with a gap where his two front teeth should be. "Absolutely terrible," Sarah agreed, ruffling his hair. "We'll have to practice for next time." It wasn't until later, when things had calmed down and she was helping Emily clean up in the kitchen, that Patricia cornered her gently. Jake's mother was a force of nature wrapped in a petite frame, all warmth and steel in equal measure. "Sarah, honey," Patricia said, drying a plate with methodical precision. "Jake mentioned you two have been going through a difficult time." Sarah tensed, preparing for questions or unsolicited advice. But Patricia just continued in her matter-of-fact way. "I want you to know that I love you like my own daughter. And whatever you and Jake decide about your future is completely your business. But if you ever need to talk or just need someone to sit with you while you don't talk, I'm here. No judgment, no expectations, just love." The simplicity of it, the complete absence of drama or demands, undid something in Sarah that had been tightly wound for too long. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick. "That means more than you know." Patricia set down her dish towel and pulled Sarah into a hug that smelled like the lavender, perfume she'd worn for as long as Sarah had known her. "You're going to be okay," she said with the conviction of someone who'd weathered her own share of storms. "You and Jake, you're going to figure it out. I know you will." On the drive home, as the sun set in spectacular colors across the Pennsylvania sky, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. Not fixed, not healed, but lighter. Like maybe she could see a path forward that didn't require her to have all the answers right now. "That wasn't as bad as I thought it would be," she admitted to Jake. He reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together on the center console. "Proud of you for going. I know that took courage." "I liked being Aunt Sarah today," Sarah said thoughtfully. "I liked getting to be part of Ethan's day without the pressure of being his mother. There was something really freeing about that." Jake glanced at her, his expression hopeful but cautious. Yeah. Sarah squeezed his hand. "I've been thinking about what you asked me at the diner. About what I actually want, stripped of all the expectations. And I think maybe I want to be really good at being an aunt. I want to be the person those kids can come to when they need someone who's not their parents. I want to invest in them without having to be responsible for every aspect of their lives. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Jake said warmly. "And there are about 20 kids at my school who could probably use that kind of attention too. Kids who don't have a lot of adults showing up for them." An idea sparked in Sarah's mind, fragile but growing stronger. What if we did something formal? Like a mentorship program or scholarships for kids who need support? We've got this big house that's mostly empty, all this space we were supposedly saving for future kids. What if we used it differently? Jake's entire face lit up, and Sarah realized with a start that this might be the first time in months she'd seen him genuinely excited rather than just relieved or cautiously optimistic. "Sarah, that's brilliant. We could start small, maybe host some study groups or college prep workshops. Build from there." They spent the rest of the drive home spinning out possibilities. And for the first time since Dr. Chun's diagnosis, Sarah felt like she was moving toward something rather than just away from pain. It wasn't the future they'd imagined, but it was a future they were choosing together, built on who they actually were rather than who they'd thought they should be. That night, lying in bed with Jake's arms around her and moonlight streaming through the windows they'd forgotten to curtain, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of pain or fear or uncertainty, but the presence of something stronger than all of those things combined. "Hey, Jake," she whispered into the darkness. "Ma? Thank you for not letting me disappear. Thank you for demanding I stay present even when it was hard. Thank you for loving me enough to fight for us." His arms tightened around her. "Always, for better or worse, remember?" "For better or worse," Sarah echoed, and this time the words felt like a promise rather than just a vow. A promise they were choosing to keep, not because it was easy, But because what they had together was worth every difficult conversation, every painful revelation, every moment of uncertainty. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn with an idea so clear it felt like it had been there all along, just waiting for her to be ready to see it. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Jake, and padded downstairs to the office they'd set up in what was supposed to eventually be a nursery. She pulled out a notebook and started writing, the words flowing faster than her hand could keep up. A proposal for a mentorship program? A budget for converting part of their house into a space for workshops? Ideas for partnerships with Jake's school and the local community center. By the time Jake found her 3 hours later, she had pages of notes and a vision so vivid she could practically see it taking shape. Couldn't sleep? He asked, setting a cup of coffee beside her on the desk. Too excited to sleep, Sarah corrected, looking up at him with genuine joy that felt foreign and familiar all at once. Jake, I think I figured out what I want our future to look like. Want to hear it? He pulled up a chair, settling in beside her with the kind of attention that said he had all the time in the world. Tell me everything. So she did. She told him about the mentorship program she wanted to create, specifically focused on young women from disadvantaged backgrounds who were interested in STEM fields. About using their home not as a space waiting to be filled with children they'd never have, but as a launching pad for kids who needed someone to believe in them. About partnering with local schools to identify students who'd benefit from extra support and creating a pipeline of opportunities that could genuinely change lives. And here's the thing, Sarah said, her enthusiasm building. This feels right. Not like settling or finding a substitute for what we lost, but like discovering what we were actually supposed to be doing all along. Like maybe all of this happened so we'd end up here instead. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. Maybe she'd gotten too carried away. Maybe this was too ambitious or impractical or, I love you, Jake said simply, and there were tears in his eyes. I love you so much, and I love this idea, and I love that you're excited about our future again. This is exactly right, Sarah. This is exactly us. Over the following months, they threw themselves into making the vision real. They converted the would-be nursery into an office where Sarah could coordinate the mentorship program. They renovated the basement into a space for workshops and study groups. They worked with Jake's principal to establish official partnerships between their program and the school district. There were setbacks, of course. Days when Sarah still felt the ache of loss for the future they'd originally imagined. Moments when well-meaning strangers asked when they were having kids and she had to navigate the conversation without falling apart. Therapy sessions, both individual and couples, where they unpacked years of assumptions and relearned how to communicate without fear, but there were also triumphs. The first time a shy sophomore named Maria came to their house for college, essay help, and left 3 hours later with a roadmap for her applications and a belief that college was actually possible for her. The scholarship fund they established in honor of Patricia, who'd passed away suddenly that winter but had been so excited about their program. The network of mentors they recruited from the community, creating a web of support for kids who'd never had adults, invested in their success. On the anniversary of Dr. Chun's diagnosis, Sarah and Jake took the day off to hike to the top of Blue Mountain, something they'd been meaning to do for years but had never made time for. They stood at the summit, looking out over the valley where they'd built their lives, and Sarah felt the full weight of the journey they'd traveled together. Do you have any regrets? Sarah asked, the question that had been hovering at the edges of her mind for months finally breaking free. Jake considered it seriously, the way he always did when she asked him something that mattered. I regret that we wasted 6 months being miserable when we could have been facing it together from the start. But the rest of it? No, I don't regret where we ended up. I don't regret any of the decisions we made together once we started being honest with each other. Me neither, Sarah realized with some surprise. A year ago, if someone had told me this is where I'd be, I would have thought they were crazy. I was so sure that not having biological children would destroy me, would destroy us. But instead, we built something different. Something better, maybe. Not better, Jake corrected gently. Just ours. Just real and honest and true to who we actually are. They stayed on the summit until sunset, talking about their plans for the program's expansion, about Maria and the other students who were becoming like family, about the trip to Italy they were planning for the following summer. The future stretched out ahead of them, still uncertain in many ways, but no longer terrifying. No longer something to be survived, but something to be lived, fully and intentionally. As they hiked back down in the gathering dusk, Jake's hand warm in hers and the stars beginning to emerge overhead. Sarah thought about that night in the bedroom when everything had finally broken open. His arms caging her against the bed, his voice demanding that she look at him, that she stay present even when every instinct screamed to flee. It had felt like an ending then, like the moment where everything she'd feared would come true. But it had actually been a beginning. The beginning of learning how to be vulnerable. The beginning of building a marriage based on truth rather than assumptions. The beginning of a future they could never have imagined, but that fit them perfectly. "Hey, Jake," Sarah said as their house came into view, warm light glowing from the windows where they'd left lamps burning. "Yeah? I'm glad you didn't let me disappear. I'm glad you fought for us even when I was too scared to fight for myself." Jake stopped walking, turning to face her fully in the twilight. He cupped her face in his hands the way he had that night, but this time there was no desperation in the gesture, only love. "Always," he said simply. "For better or worse. For the rest of our lives. I will always choose us." Sarah rose up to kiss him, there on the sidewalk in front of the home they'd built together, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They'd been broken. They'd been lost. They'd nearly let fear destroy what they had. But they'd found their way back to each other, and in doing so, they'd discovered a future more meaningful than either of them had imagined possible. This was their story. Not the one they'd planned, but the one they'd chosen together. And it was more than enough. It was everything.